As I look around at the vast terrain before me, I think this is the ideal location for a castle, although it happened the other way around. I thought the ideal place for my castle design would be some mountains, so I made them, slapped them together with just a few simple commands. I've had it on my mind for quite some time to build my own ice castle, so I made a very simple sketch of the castle that I'm going to insert on my mountains. It may not be exactly to scale to the mountains, but this is purely fantasy, so anything goes. Having a reference for the castle is very helpful, but even with the reference, as helpful as it is, it can still be difficult getting the structure started. A lot of careful measurements and thought gets put into the stage because I have to fill in information that I didn't sketch out, such as the back of the castle. I'm also rearranging parts of my sketch and completely redoing how they're designed. I can't decide if this is the easiest or hardest step of the castle. In some ways it's the hardest because it's the first thing I build and I have to create something from nothing. Whereas once I start adding the detail onto my layout, it's pretty easy because I can just trace around what I had already built. I say easy, but that doesn't mean it happens quickly. It can take hours just to design one small section. And really the first part of the design process is the hardest because I'm trying to set a standard for the rest of the castle when it comes to my block palette and patterns I'm using. The other thing I have to take great care in is making sure all of the walls are lining up correctly, that they're all measured correctly, because I want to make sure they are all going to fit the details that I have planned for them properly, so they do have to be very specific lengths. This is one of the reasons I generally prefer organics over structure, because at least with organics, you have more leeway and you can make mistakes and it doesn't ruin the entire build where you have to shift everything around just to make it line up perfectly. I also find I tend to get stuck in the design process of a structure build. I never want to look repetitive, but I also want all of the details to look unified and distinct. I also have a hard time coming up with enough good detail to include, especially for something this large. When you've got large blank walls, I'm not really good at knowing how to fill those spaces. Normally my go-to is just to add a giant window to the side, but if there are still blank walls, I guess the best thing I can do is try to texture them. I'm just not the greatest at that, but I still think for this castle it did work out well in the end. I managed to get enough detail in where it didn't look too plain. As far as commands that I've used for this castle, I used all the typical ones: copy, flip, paste, loft. But I must say, of all of the commands I've used, the smear command, surprisingly, was the most helpful of all of them. And I do have a tutorial for the smear command. I just hadn't used it very much up to this point, and I found out it is the perfect command for large structures. It makes it very easy for me to fill in walls and windows where there is an edge that isn't straight. All it takes is a few commands and poof, it's filled in. So if you'd like to learn more about that particular command, which is also from Archeon, I do have a tutorial for it. I didn't talk about this use case because I just recently found out how handy it really is. That is your tip for the day. Structure is generally very straightforward in its design, but when it came time for me to add this special ice bridge, I struggled to find the best way to create evenly spaced supports that are also cut out to be perpendicular to the curve of the bridge. I ended up using a method where I did a starting cutout using the poly selection so that I could get it on the angle that seemed appropriate. Then I adjusted the curve toward the top by hand and just guessed throughout. Seemed to be the best solution, even if it was much more of a pain to do. While I had initially only planned to do the exterior of this castle, I was trying to decide if I wanted to do a full interior or not. I didn't think in the end that it would have been worth my time to do a complete interior, but I still wanted to experiment in some cases. So I ended up doing a partial interior, just a couple rooms. They aren't fully furnished, they're kind of open and bare, but I do like tinkering with ideas for interiors, even if it isn't my favorite thing. It's nice to see the potential there if I ever did want to take it further. But again, my primary objective was to create a stunning ice castle from the outside, not as much on the inside. After some final touch-ups to the castle, texturing some blank walls and adding more frost to all the edges, since I did want everything to look frosty on this castle, it's time to add a few silvery trees to this landscape. I do have a tutorial for this particular tree. It can be found in my glowing tree designs. I'm just glad I have an excuse to use it in a larger project. All in all, I really enjoyed working on this project. I didn't want to rush anything, so I took my time with it, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I didn't make any renders of this build, but it looks very nice just using shaders, as you will see in a moment. But I hope you enjoyed this build and found it inspirational. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.